In the small, quiet town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges, colorful flower beds, and freshly painted mailboxes. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved hello. In the mornings, kids rode their bikes down winding roads after school, and nothing much ever happened to disrupt the calm rhythm of daily life. For John and Sarah, this suburban haven seemed like the perfect escape from the chaos they had left behind. John worked as an IT consultant for a tech company based in the city. His job required long hours sitting in front of screens, troubleshooting problems, and meeting tight deadlines. While it wasn't glamorous, it paid well enough to afford them a comfortable lifestyle. Sarah, on the other hand, had spent nearly 2 decades serving her country in one of the most elite units within the U.S. military, the Delta Force. She'd been deployed to some of the world's most dangerous places, facing situations that would terrify even the bravest souls. Her skills were unmatched, honed through years of rigorous training and real-world missions. But despite all she had accomplished, Sarah preferred to keep her past hidden from view. To the people of Willow Creek, she was simply Sarah, a friendly neighbor who enjoyed baking cookies and taking leisurely jogs around the block. When they first moved into their cozy home on Maple Street, John and Sarah thought they had finally found their slice of paradise. The neighborhood association, known as the Homeowners Association, HOA, promised to maintain the area's charm and orderliness. At first glance, the HOA appeared to be just another group of volunteers dedicated to keeping things tidy. They sent out newsletters reminding residents to mow their lawns regularly, avoid parking cars on the street overnight, and keep noise levels down during certain hours. Most folks followed these guidelines without complaint, appreciating the effort to preserve the community's aesthetic appeal. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Some residents felt suffocated by the endless list of rules and regulations. Others resented the way the HOA enforced compliance, often coming across as overly aggressive or judgmental. Among the most vocal enforcers was Mr. Harold Jenkins, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a penchant for authority. Jenkins fancied himself as the unofficial sheriff of Willow Creek, patrolling the streets in his souped-up golf cart, outfitted with flashing red and blue lights. He carried a clipboard stuffed with notes about infractions and, more troublingly, a handgun he'd purchased online under questionable circumstances. To say Jenkins took his role seriously would be an understatement. He prided himself on catching violators in the act, whether it was someone leaving their garbage cans out too long or walking their dog without a leash. Neighbors whispered about him behind closed doors, calling him names like the Lawn Nazi or Rulebook Harry. Still, most tried to stay on his good side, fearing retaliation if they crossed him. After all, Jenkins wasn't above issuing hefty fines or worse, reporting offenders to the HOA board. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a golden glow over the neighborhood, Sarah decided to wash their family SUV. It had been a busy week, and she hadn't had time to take it to the car wash. Besides, washing the car herself gave her a chance to unwind and enjoy the cool evening air. With a bucket of soapy water and a sponge in hand, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work in the driveway. The rhythmic scrubbing helped clear her mind, allowing her thoughts to drift away from the stresses of everyday life. As Sarah worked, she noticed headlights approaching from down the street. A familiar golf cart came into view, its flashing lights casting eerie shadows on nearby houses. Sure enough, it was Harold Jenkins, flanked by 2 other HOA members eager to tag along for the ride. Jenkins slowed to a stop near the curb, his expression already hardening into a scowl. Without wasting a moment, he climbed out of the cart and marched toward Sarah, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jenkins barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the stillness of the evening. "Do you realize what time it is? You're violating HOA rule number 37, no outdoor activities past 8 o'clock. Sarah paused mid-scrub, turning to face him with a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Jenkins," she replied calmly. "I'm almost done here. I didn't think washing my car would bother anyone." "It's not about bothering anyone," Jenkins snapped, his tone growing more agitated. "It's about following the rules. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we expect everyone to do their part to keep it that way." Sarah nodded understandingly, though inside, she couldn't help but roll her eyes. She'd encountered plenty of men like Jenkins during her career. People who believed shouting louder made them right. Instead of arguing, she set the sponge aside and wiped her hands on a towel. "I understand your concern," she said diplomatically. "But surely there are bigger issues to worry about than someone washing their car." Jenkins bristled at her response, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "Bigger issues?" he repeated incredulously. "Ma'am, this isn't open for debate. Either you comply with the rules or I'll have no choice but to report you." The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Jenkins began pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath about how disrespectful Sarah was being. Meanwhile, the two other HOA members exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or let Jenkins handle things himself. As the confrontation dragged on, Jenkins grew increasingly frustrated. In a shocking move, he reached for the holster strapped to his hip and drew his handgun, pointing it directly at Sarah. For most people, having a gun aimed at them would be terrifying, but Sarah wasn't most people. Years of combat experience kicked in instantly, her mind racing through potential outcomes and strategies. Though her heart rate remained steady, she raised her hands slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Mr. Jenkins," she said evenly, "there's no need for this. Let's talk this through like reasonable adults." Her calm demeanor only seemed to unnerve Jenkins further. He tightened his grip on the weapon, his knuckles turning white. "Don't move," he shouted, his voice trembling with panic. "I mean it." Little did Jenkins know he had just picked the wrong person to threaten. The tension in the air was palpable as Harold Jenkins stood there, his handgun trembling slightly in his grip. His face was flushed red, a mix of anger and anxiety etched into every line. Sarah, on the other hand, remained eerily calm, her hands raised but her posture relaxed. To an outsider, it might have looked like a scene from a movie, a man with a gun facing off against a woman who appeared unfazed. But this wasn't fiction. It was happening right in the driveway of their suburban home. Jenkins' voice cracked as he tried to assert dominance. "You think you're above the rules? You can't just do whatever you want here?" He spat, his words laced with frustration. He paced back and forth, glancing at his two companions for support, but they seemed frozen in place, unsure how to react. One of them shifted uncomfortably while the other stared at the ground, avoiding eye contact altogether. It was clear that neither had expected things to escalate this far. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She took a deep breath, her mind working quickly. Years of training had taught her that panic only made situations worse. Instead of reacting impulsively, she focused on keeping her tone even and measured. "Mr. Jenkins," she said softly, "I understand you're upset, but pointing a gun isn't necessary. Let's find a way to resolve this peacefully." Her calmness seemed to irritate Jenkins even more. "Don't tell me what's necessary," he snapped, his voice rising. "You broke the rules, and now you're trying to act all innocent." "Well, I'm not falling for it." By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of a few neighbors. Some peeked through their curtains, too scared to step outside, while others cautiously approached to see what was going on. Among them was Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She clutched her sweater tightly around her shoulders, her eyes wide with concern. "Harold, what's going on?" she called out timidly. "Is everything all right?" Jenkins ignored her, his focus entirely on Sarah. "Everything would be fine if people followed the rules," he yelled over his shoulder, not bothering to turn around. His knuckles were white from gripping the gun so tightly, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the cool evening breeze. Sarah noticed these small details, how his hand shook ever so slightly, how his breathing came in short bursts, how his eyes darted around nervously. These were signs of someone losing control, and she knew better than to push him further. Instead, she continued speaking in a soothing tone, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "Mr. Jenkins, let's put the gun away. We don't need it here. I'll stop washing the car right now if that's what you want." For a brief moment, it seemed like Jenkins might lower the weapon. He hesitated, his arm wavering slightly. But then something inside him snapped again. "No!" he barked, stepping closer to Sarah, You don't get to decide anything. You've been nothing but trouble since you moved in here. Trouble? Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of the accusation. Trouble wasn't forgetting to mow your lawn or leaving your trash cans out overnight. Trouble was dodging bullets in a war zone, surviving on adrenaline and instincts when every second counted. Still, she kept her emotions in check, knowing that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. Just as the standoff reached its peak, headlights appeared at the end of the street. A car turned into the driveway. It was John returning home earlier than expected. He'd been feeling unwell at work and decided to leave early, completely unaware of the drama unfolding at home. When he stepped out of the vehicle, his jaw dropped at the sight before him. Jenkins holding a gun, Sarah standing calmly with her hands up, and a small crowd of curious neighbors gathering nearby. "What's going on here?" John asked, his voice sharp with alarm. He instinctively moved toward Sarah, his protective instincts kicking in. "Why is there a gun involved?" Jenkins swung the weapon slightly in John's direction, though his aim remained shaky. "Stay back," he warned, his voice cracking under pressure. "This doesn't concern you." John froze mid-step, his heart pounding. He'd never been in a situation like this before. Sure, he'd seen action movies, but those were scripted. This was real life, and the stakes couldn't be higher. For a split second, he locked eyes with Sarah, silently asking if she was okay. She gave him the tiniest nod, signaling that she was handling it, but also urging him to stay calm. Realizing he needed help, John pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As he explained the situation to the operator, Jenkins grew increasingly agitated. "You're making a big mistake," he shouted, waving the gun wildly. "I'm just doing my job. If everyone followed the rules, none of this would have happened." The sound of approaching sirens filled the air moments later, cutting through the tense silence. Jenkins's demeanor shifted once again. The bravado he'd shown earlier began to crumble, replaced by a look of panic. He glanced at the road, then back at Sarah and John, clearly realizing he was in over his head. "This isn't fair," he muttered, lowering the gun slightly but still refusing to put it away. When the police arrived, the scene was chaotic. Officers poured out of their cars, weapons drawn, shouting commands for everyone to stay still. Jenkins finally dropped the gun, his hands flying up in surrender. The two HOA members who had accompanied him backed away slowly, their faces pale, with shock. Neighbors watched from a safe distance, whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. One of the officers approached Sarah and John, asking them to recount what had happened. Sarah explained the situation calmly, sticking to the facts without embellishing. She mentioned Jenkins' aggressive behavior, the gun being drawn, and her attempts to defuse the situation. John chimed in, describing how he'd found the scene upon arriving home. Both of them emphasized that they hadn't provoked Jenkins in any way. Meanwhile, another officer cuffed Jenkins and placed him in the back of a squad car. As they questioned him, Jenkins stammered excuses, claiming he'd felt threatened and acted in self-defense. "She stepped toward me," he insisted, pointing at Sarah. "I thought she was going to attack me." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. From their perspective, it didn't seem like Sarah posed much of a threat. She was unarmed, cooperative, and had done nothing to justify Jenkins pulling a gun. Still, they promised to investigate thoroughly, assuring everyone that justice would be served. As the initial chaos subsided, Sarah noticed several neighbors approaching her cautiously. They offered words of support, thanking her for staying composed during such a frightening ordeal. Some admitted they'd always found Jenkins intimidating and were relieved to see him held accountable. Others expressed concern for her safety, asking if she was okay. Sarah smiled graciously, assuring them she was fine and grateful for their kindness. But unbeknownst to anyone, not even John, the wheels in Sarah's mind were already turning. She couldn't shake the irony of the situation. Here she was, a highly trained soldier capable of disarming Jenkins in seconds, yet she'd chosen restraint instead. Why? Because violence wasn't the answer unless absolutely necessary. And tonight, it hadn't been. As the officers finished taking statements and secured the area, Sarah leaned against the hood of her still soapy SUV, watching the flashing lights of the police cars reflect off the houses. The night had taken a turn no one could have predicted, but somehow, she felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe it was because she knew she'd handled the situation exactly as she should have. Or maybe it was because, in that moment, she realized just how different her life in Willow Creek truly was from the battles she'd fought overseas. Whatever the reason, Sarah knew one thing for certain. This quiet little neighborhood might never be the same again. The aftermath of the incident left the neighborhood buzzing with whispers and speculation. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves suddenly found themselves drawn together, eager to share their thoughts on what had transpired. Some were quick to defend Harold Jenkins, arguing that he was simply trying to enforce the rules and maintain order in Willow Creek. Others, however, saw his actions as reckless and unnecessary, pointing out that pulling a gun over something as trivial as washing a car was completely disproportionate. For Sarah and John, life in the days following the confrontation felt surreal. The local news picked up the story, referring to it vaguely as a heated dispute involving an HOA member. Reporters camped outside their home, hoping for a comment or glimpse of the couple at the center of the drama, but Sarah preferred to stay out of the spotlight. She declined interviews and avoided engaging with curious neighbors, choosing instead to focus on returning to some semblance of normalcy. Still, she couldn't ignore the ripple effect her calm demeanor during the standoff had created. As investigators dug deeper into the case, they uncovered details about Sarah's past, details that shocked even those closest to her. While much of her military record remained classified, enough information surfaced to paint a picture of someone extraordinary. Newspaper articles highlighted her service in the Delta Force, describing her as a decorated soldier who had completed missions in some of the world's most dangerous regions. Words like hero and legend began circulating among residents, though Sarah herself cringed at such labels. To her, she was just doing her job, a job she'd chosen because she believed in protecting others. Meanwhile, Harold Jenkins faced mounting legal troubles. He was charged with aggravated assault and unlawful possession of a firearm, crimes that carried significant penalties. His arrest made headlines not only locally, but also nationally, as people across the country weighed in on the absurdity of the situation. Social media exploded with memes mocking Jenkins's behavior, dubbing him the HOA cowboy. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves from him, embarrassed by his actions. Even members of the HOA board, who had previously supported his strict enforcement tactics, publicly condemned his conduct. But perhaps the most surprising development came when law enforcement conducted background checks on everyone involved. Officers discovered that Sarah wasn't just any former soldier. She was still actively serving in the Delta Force, albeit in a less visible capacity. This revelation sent shockwaves through the police department. One officer later joked, "If we'd known who we were dealing with, we might have asked her to handle Jenkins ourselves." Word of Sarah's true identity spread quickly throughout Willow Creek. Suddenly, the quiet woman jogging through the streets or practicing yoga in her backyard seemed far more intriguing. Neighbors marveled at how someone so unassuming could possess such incredible skills. Parents whispered stories about her to their kids, framing her as a real-life superhero living right under their noses. For many, Sarah became a symbol of strength and resilience, a stark contrast to Jenkins' volatile behavior. Despite the newfound attention, Sarah remained humble. When neighbors approached her to express admiration or gratitude, she politely thanked them but downplayed her role in the incident. "I didn't do anything special," she would say with a shrug. Anyone would have done the same thing. Of course, deep down, everyone knew that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have remained as composed as Sarah did when confronted with a loaded gun. John, on the other hand, struggled to contain his amusement. He teased Sarah relentlessly about the whole ordeal, joking that Jenkins must have been regretting his decision by now. "Imagine the look on his face if he knew you could have disarmed him before he even blinked," John said one evening as they sat on the porch, sipping coffee. Sarah chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Let's hope he learns his lesson without needing another demonstration," she replied dryly. While the immediate fallout dominated conversations, the incident also sparked broader discussions about the role of the HOA in Willow Creek. Residents began questioning whether the organization had become too powerful, wielding authority without accountability. Petitions circulated calling for reforms including greater transparency and stricter guidelines for enforcing rules. A town hall meeting was scheduled to address these concerns, giving community members a platform to voice their frustrations and solutions. Sarah initially hesitated to participate, fearing it might draw even more attention to her. But John encouraged her to attend, reminding her that her perspective could inspire positive change. Reluctantly, she agreed, deciding to speak briefly about the importance of mutual respect and understanding within the community. Her speech, delivered calmly yet passionately, resonated deeply with attendees. She emphasized that while rules were necessary, they shouldn't come at the expense of kindness or empathy. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause, with several residents rising to their feet in appreciation. In the weeks that followed, tangible changes began taking shape. The HOA board disbanded voluntarily, acknowledging that their methods had alienated too many residents. In its place, a new committee emerged, one focused on fostering collaboration rather than control. Elected representatives prioritized open communication, holding regular meetings where neighbors could share ideas and concerns. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in Willow Creek transformed. People started smiling more, chatting longer, and working together to solve problems. Even Harold Jenkins's absence seemed to lift a weight off the community. With him gone, tensions eased, and residents breathed easier knowing they wouldn't face unwarranted scrutiny for minor infractions. Some joked that the neighborhood had finally regained its soul, free from the shadow of fear Jenkins had cast over it. For Sarah, the experience reinforced why she loved Willow Creek despite its quirks. It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was far from it, but it was home. And though she'd never sought recognition or praise, she couldn't deny feeling a sense of pride in having contributed to making it better. Whether it was mentoring a few interested neighbors in basic self-defense techniques or simply lending an ear to someone in need, Sarah embraced her role as a quiet leader within the community. Life eventually settled back into its usual rhythm, though with a renewed sense of purpose. Children resumed playing outside, laughter echoed through the streets, and the hum of lawnmowers returned to weekend mornings. Yet, beneath the surface, Willow Creek had changed forever. Its residents had learned valuable lessons about standing up against injustice, supporting one another, and finding strength in unity. And as Sarah jogged along the tree-lined paths each morning, she couldn't help but smile. She knew that peace had returned to her little corner of the world, and if anyone ever tried to disrupt it again, well, they'd quickly discover exactly who they were dealing with. The transformation in Willow Creek was undeniable. What had once been a neighborhood governed by strict rules and fear of retribution became a place where people felt empowered to speak their minds and advocate for change. The dissolution of the old HOA board marked the beginning of a new era, one defined by cooperation, empathy, and a shared commitment to making the community better for everyone. And while Harold Jenkins' name faded into obscurity, Sarah's quiet leadership continued to inspire those around her. Harold Jenkins' legal troubles dragged on for months, casting a long shadow over his life. The charges against him were serious, and the court proceedings revealed just how reckless his actions had been. During testimony, officers recounted how Jenkins had escalated a minor disagreement into a dangerous confrontation, pointing a loaded gun at an unarmed woman without provocation. Witnesses described his erratic behavior, painting a picture of someone desperate to assert control, but utterly incapable of handling responsibility. Jenkins' defense attorney tried to argue that he had acted out of fear, claiming Sarah's calm demeanor had unnerved him. But prosecutors countered this narrative with evidence of Sarah's non-threatening behavior throughout the encounter. Video footage from a neighbor's security camera showed Sarah raising her hands peacefully, speaking softly and attempting to de-escalate the situation. It was clear to everyone involved, except perhaps Jenkins himself, that his reaction had been grossly disproportionate. As the trial unfolded, Jenkins's reputation crumbled further. Former allies distanced themselves, unwilling to associate, with someone whose actions had brought shame to the community. Even his family struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the image portrayed in court documents and news reports. In the end, Jenkins pleaded guilty to reduced charges, avoiding jail time but facing hefty fines, mandatory anger management classes, and a permanent ban from holding any position of authority within Willow Creek. For many residents, it was a fitting conclusion to a saga that had shaken the neighborhood to its core. While Jenkins retreated from public view, Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight, not because she sought attention, but because her actions had sparked meaningful conversations about safety, respect, and accountability. Neighbors often stopped her during walks or at the grocery store to thank her for standing up to Jenkins. Some admitted they'd been too intimidated to challenge the HOA before, crediting her courage with giving them the confidence to do so now. Others expressed admiration for her composure under pressure, marveling at how she had remained calm despite having a gun pointed at her. Sarah handled the praise graciously, always deflecting credit back to the community. "It wasn't just me," she would say. "Everyone who spoke up made a difference." Yet, there was no denying that her presence had shifted the dynamics in Willow Creek. People began looking to her as a role model, not because of her military background, but because of her ability to lead by example. She demonstrated that strength didn't have to mean aggression. Sometimes it meant choosing restraint when others might lash out. One day, as Sarah sorted mail at the kitchen table, she noticed an invitation tucked among the usual bills and flyers. It was from the newly formed neighborhood committee, asking her to join as an advisor. At first she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to take on such a visible role. But John encouraged her to consider it, reminding her of the impact she'd already had. "You don't have to be the face of everything," he said. "Just help guide them behind the scenes." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, attending her first meeting a week later. The committee members greeted her warmly, eager to hear her thoughts on fostering trust and collaboration. Over time, she offered practical advice on conflict resolution, emphasizing the importance of listening and finding common ground. Her input proved invaluable, helping the group navigate challenges and build momentum for positive change. Beyond formal roles, Sarah also found ways to contribute informally. When neighbors expressed interest in learning self-defense techniques, she organized casual workshops in her backyard. These sessions weren't about combat moves or high-stakes scenarios. They focused on awareness, confidence, and basic skills anyone could use in everyday situations. Participants ranged from teenagers to retirees, all united by a desire to feel safer and more prepared. Sarah's approachable teaching style put everyone at ease, turning what could have been intimidating lessons into fun, empowering experiences. John watched all of this unfold with pride and a touch of amusement. He loved seeing Sarah step into her role as a mentor and leader, even if she downplayed her influence. One evening, as they relaxed on the couch after dinner, he teased her about the irony of it all. "Who would have thought washing your car would turn you into the neighborhood superhero?" He joked, earning a playful nudge from Sarah. "I'm not a superhero," she replied, rolling her eyes. "I'm just someone trying to make things better." But deep down, Sarah knew that her actions had made a difference. She hadn't set out to be a catalyst for change, but the incident with Jenkins had highlighted flaws in the system and shown people that they had the power to fix them. By staying true to her principles and leading with integrity, she had helped transform Willow Creek into a place where residents felt valued and heard. As spring gave way to summer, the neighborhood blossomed both literally and figuratively. Flower gardens bloomed along sidewalks. Banners announcing community events fluttered in the breeze, and laughter filled the air during block parties and picnics. The once dreaded HOA meetings were replaced by lively discussions where ideas flowed freely and decisions were made collectively. Residents took ownership of their community, volunteering for projects like planting trees, organizing cleanup days, and hosting fundraisers for local charities. Even the smallest gestures carried significance. Neighbors checked in on one another, more often offering assistance with yard work or bringing meals to those going through tough times. Children played together without worry, knowing that adults were watching out for them. The sense of connection and belonging grew stronger with each passing day, proving that kindness and teamwork could overcome even the deepest divisions. For Sarah, these changes reinforced why she had chosen Willow Creek as her home. Despite its initial quirks and occasional absurdities, it was a place where people cared about one another. And though she still preferred to stay out of the limelight, she couldn't deny feeling a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had played a part in creating something special. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah stood on her front porch, sipping a cup of tea. Across the street, a group of kids played tag, their giggles echoing through the warm evening air. Down the block, a couple strolled hand in hand, pausing to admire the flowers in someone's garden. Everything seemed peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of that fateful night months earlier. John joined her on the porch, handing her a plate of cookies fresh from the oven. "Looks like we're stuck here for good now," he said with a grin. "No chance of sneaking off to some other quiet neighborhood." Sarah smiled, leaning against him. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she replied softly. "This place feels different now, like it's ours." And it was. Willow Creek had become more than just a collection of houses and streets. It was a community built on trust, resilience, and hope. Thanks to Sarah's quiet strength and unwavering determination, it had emerged stronger than ever, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. The ripple effects of Sarah's actions continued to shape Willow Creek, long after the initial incident had faded from headlines. What had started as a confrontation over a simple act, washing a car, had grown into something far greater. A movement toward unity, understanding, and shared responsibility. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was undeniably better than it had been before. For Sarah, this shift brought a quiet sense of fulfillment, even if she never sought recognition for her role in sparking it. As autumn arrived, painting the trees with fiery hues of red and gold, Willow Creek buzzed with activity. The new neighborhood committee had organized its first annual Fall Festival, an event designed to bring residents together and celebrate their community's resilience. Booths lined the park, offering homemade pies, hand-knitted scarves, and crafts made by local children. Live music drifted through the crisp air, blending with the laughter of families enjoying hayrides and pumpkin carving contests. It was a day filled with joy, and a stark reminder of how far the neighborhood had come. Sarah attended the festival with John, both of them mingling with neighbors who greeted them warmly. Children ran up to Sarah, tugging at her sleeve and asking if she'd judge their pie baking competition. She laughed, agreeing to taste each entry while John teased her about developing a sweet tooth. Though she tried to stay in the background, people naturally gravitated toward her, eager to share stories or simply thank her for being part of the community. One elderly woman even pressed a jar of homemade jam into Sarah's hands, insisting she take it as a token of gratitude. "You've done so much for us," the woman said softly. "We're lucky to have you here." Sarah accepted the gift graciously, though inwardly she felt humbled. To her, she hadn't done anything extraordinary, just acted with integrity when it mattered most. Still, she recognized that sometimes the simplest acts could inspire profound change. By standing firm against injustice and choosing calmness over conflict, she had shown others what was possible. And now, seeing the results of that effort unfold around her, she couldn't help but feel proud. The festival also provided an opportunity for reflection. As Sarah wandered through the park, she noticed subtle signs of progress everywhere. Gone were the rigid rules and fear-based enforcement that had once defined life in Willow Creek. In their place stood a spirit of collaboration and mutual respect. Neighbors worked side by side to set up booths, sharing tools and supplies without hesitation. Parents exchanged parenting tips while keeping an eye on their kids, who played tag and climbed trees without worry. Even disagreements were handled with patience and humor, a far cry from the tense standoffs of the past. One particularly heartwarming moment came when Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who had fortuitously witnessed Jenkins' meltdown, approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you," Mrs. Peterson said, clutching Sarah's hand. "Before all this, I was afraid to speak up, afraid of what might happen if I crossed Harold or the HOA. But seeing you stand your ground gave me courage. Now, I know we can make things better if we stick together." Sarah nodded, squeezing Mrs. Peterson's hand gently. "You're stronger than you think," she replied. "And so is everyone else here. That's why Willow Creek is changing, for the better." Even Harold Jenkins's absence loomed less heavily over the neighborhood as time passed. While some still harbored resentment toward him, others chose to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. At the festival, a few former HOA members approached Sarah cautiously, apologizing for not speaking out sooner. They admitted they had been complicit in allowing Jenkins' behavior to go unchecked and vowed to support the community in more constructive ways. Sarah listened without judgment, accepting their apologies and encouraging them to get involved in the committee's initiatives. John, ever the optimist, joked that Sarah was turning into a diplomat. "Next thing you know, they'll be asking you to mediate international conflicts," he quipped one evening as they unpacked leftovers from the festival. Sarah rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Let's stick to fixing neighborhoods, okay?" she said. World peace might be a bit ambitious. Despite her modesty, Sarah's influence extended beyond Willow Creek. News of the incident and its aftermath spread beyond local boundaries, inspiring similar conversations in other communities grappling with overbearing HOAs or divisive leadership. Articles profiling Sarah's story highlighted not only her military background, but also her philosophy of leading with kindness and restraint. Readers wrote letters praising her example, sharing how it motivated them to address issues in their own neighborhoods. Some even reached out directly, asking for advice on navigating difficult situations. Sarah responded to each message thoughtfully, offering guidance rooted in empathy and practicality. Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah resumed her daily routines, jogging through the streets at dawn and practicing yoga in the backyard. Yet these moments carried new meaning now. Strangers no longer saw her as just another neighbor. They viewed her as a symbol of strength and resilience. Kids waved enthusiastically whenever she passed by, calling her name and asking when the next self-defense workshop would be held. Parents smiled knowingly, grateful for the positive impact she'd had on their children and themselves. John often teased her about becoming a local celebrity, pointing out how many people stopped to chat whenever they went for walks. "Face it," he said one afternoon as they strolled past a group of teenagers attempting skateboard tricks. "You're officially famous." Sarah shrugged, brushing off the comment. "I'm just living my life," she said. "If people want to make a big deal out of it, that's their choice." Still, there were moments when Sarah allowed herself to acknowledge the significance of everything that had happened. Late at night, as she sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From her days in the Delta Force to the quiet life she now cherished, every experience had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. She realized that true strength wasn't about wielding power or dominating others. It was about using your abilities to uplift those around you. Winter arrived, blanketing Willow Creek in a soft layer of snow. The holidays brought another round of festivities, including a tree lighting ceremony in the town square. Families gathered around the towering evergreen, sipping hot cocoa and singing carols as twinkling lights illuminated the night. Sarah stood beside John, holding his hand, as they watched the scene unfold. It was a moment of pure contentment, one that reminded her why she had chosen this life. As the year drew to a close, Sarah found herself looking ahead with optimism. Willow Creek had proven that communities could evolve, adapt, and thrive when people worked together. Mistakes had been made, lessons learned, and bonds strengthened. The neighborhood wasn't immune to challenges, but it was equipped to face them head-on, with courage, compassion, and a commitment to doing what was right. For Sarah, the future held endless possibilities. Whether mentoring neighbors, participating In committee meetings or simply enjoying quiet evenings at home, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Willow Creek had become more than just a place to live. It was a testament to the power of unity and resilience. And though she rarely spoke of it, Sarah took comfort in knowing that her actions had helped create something truly special. A community built on trust, kindness, and hope. As fireworks lit up the sky on New Year's Eve, signaling the start of a fresh chapter, Sarah raised her glass in a silent toast. To Willow Creek, to its people, and to the promise of brighter days ahead. Whatever challenges lay in store, she was ready to face them, not alone, but alongside the friends and neighbors who had become her family.